Welcome, everyone. How are you all doing?
Good.
It's very pretty out there, isn't it? Yet we're in here because this work is so important. All right, so I'm Cal Lee. I'm here nearby at the School of Information and Library Science. We're very grateful to Wilson Library for providing us this space. And thanks to those from outside of the project who came on very short notice when we sent out the announcement about this. We understand some people might have time conflicts and not be able to stick around for the whole afternoon, but if you can, you're very welcome, and we're happy everyone's here. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of an introduction to the OssArcFlow project that is behind this event. I'm going to talk a little bit about the day. All that I'm going to present to you is riding on the work of a lot of other people in the room. What I'd like to do after I do the brief introduction is just ask the people who are the main project team to kind of, stand, wave, introduce themselves. And you'll get a chance to hear from the partners and a lot of other people involved in the project throughout the day. So this project has been long in the making. It was kind of underway for several years. We were really excited when it got funded by the IMLS. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the project, who's involved, why we got it started in the first place. Again, a lot of thanks to the people who put together a lot of the materials you're going to be seeing in my presentation. These aren't all materials that I generated myself. So the very quick overview is that it's a 2-year project. It started this summer. It's going to be going on for 2 years, funded by IMLS, Institute of Library and Museum Services. Many people in this room have benefited through IMLS funding in the past. The project goals are basically to investigate, model, and test a range of workflows for collecting institutions, libraries, archives, museums, libraries and archives in particular, to curate born digital content, the workflow, obviously, is a very fundamental focus of this. This is not a project in which we're going to create one monolithic system. We're looking at the workflows involved. And it is based on these 2 different research questions. How can institutions combine tools to support workflows that meet local institutional needs? And what sort of issues and support structures are associated with handoffs? Basically, this grew out of a lot of conversations we had with professionals who have no shortage of possible tools to be working with, but have a lot of issues of figuring out essentially how should they be chained together, how is data generated in this one system going to move to the other system. Activities involve documenting the workflows for the 12 partner institutions. This has been a very heavy focus of both the project team and the partners who you're going to be hearing from today in these early days of the project, figuring out essentially what are people's existing workflows and then what are their aspirational workflows, developing approaches to facilitate the handoffs. So again, this is not the idea that we're going to take the systems involved and just unify them into one big interface or one big architecture, but to facilitate handoffs between one and the other, designing training modules to help people outside of the project in particular, because one of the real interests, I think, in this project is not just of the partners, but people who want to look at institutions that are like their own and get a sense of how they're actually putting these things together. And then creating this implementation guide, which will be coming out of the project to give people an idea about ways to approach these things, right? Very high level, the considerations are technical from some perspective, but very largely institutional as well, right? So how do you make determinations about how you're going to combine these different bits of software? The motivation, a single turnkey system is not coming anytime soon, right? We've got all of these different activities that have communities, development software around them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them for those who might not be familiar with the BitCurator environment, ArchivesSpace, and Archivematica. I can certainly speak with the most authority about the BigCurator environment of those 3. I definitely can't speak with the most authority of the people in this room on the other 2, but I'll do my best. Modular open source software tools to support digital curation workflows have really been maturing in recent years. There are communities around them. I think we're at a very good time for a project like this because the associated communities that we're representing have been around for some time, have energy behind them, have people really contributing to their further development. But collecting institutions really have these issues of trying to determine how am I going to combine them, how are they going to kind of move my workflow in a certain direction as opposed to just incorporating one system that works as advertised. And there's often a need to address gaps and overlaps. So to cite just a couple seemingly very trivial examples, things like checksums or virus scans or unique identifiers. There are a lot of things that different systems do, and the question is, do I do this in each of the systems? Do I do it in only one? How do you make these determinations? These are the partners. One of the things that is very much by design in this project is that it's a relatively diverse set of partners across a lot of different dimensions, because what we want is not just to support work on bettering the workflows in those institutions, but come out with documentation about them that will help other kinds of institutions. And what we've found through previous work is that people often find models, guidelines to resonate most with them if they think that institution is like theirs, right? And so if we have a range of private, public, large, small, library, archives, these different kinds of institutions, there's more chance that people will look at that and say, oh yeah, I'm in a medium-sized liberal arts college, maybe that's kind of what I need to be doing, right? So the project team, right, so we've got these kind of different concentric circles. We've got the project team, the people who are actually being funded to work on this project. We have the partners who are these 12 institutions, and then we have the wider world of interested institutions, right? So these are the project team. LYRASIS and Artefactual being associated with ArchivesSpace and Archivematica, the School of Information and Library Science being where I'm based and where the BigCurator environment kind of grew out of. The Educopia Institute, if you're not familiar, being this kind of nonprofit institutional structure that's behind a lot of other communities. So they are a sort of incubator and caretaker for things like the Library Publishing Coalition, the BitCurator Consortium, Meta Archive, things that came out of maybe one institutional context but are best stewarded by being a shared kind of community. And that's one of the great things about the partnership between the BitCurator Consortium and Educopia, is we had this grant-funded set of projects that the Mellon Foundation had supported. They needed to move into some kind of community structure that wasn't just UNC, and that's the kind of role that Educopia has played in a lot of different arenas. So the different systems we're talking about, the BigCurator Environment, ArchiveSpace, and Archivematica. You'll hear bits and pieces of the application of these various things in the panel discussions throughout the day. So I'm just going to touch on them very briefly. The BitCurator Environment basically is this effort to take open source digital forensic software and allow people to use it in collecting institutions. So if you're divvying out all the different sub-roles of these different bits of software, this is essentially kind of the triage, pre-processing, pre-ingest aspects of the work. That's not strictly speaking true for some of the later work, like BitCurator Access and BitCurator NLP, which are also Mellon-funded projects that we've been working on in more recent years. I'm really not going to be talking about those here now. But the original grant was a set of 2 different awards from the Mellon Foundation to develop the software in partnership between SILS and the Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities. It's now maintained by the BitCurator Consortium. There's several people in the room here who play very active roles in the BitCurator Consortium, including, wow, the current and past 2 presidents of the BitCurator Consortium are all in the room right now. So BitCurator does all kinds of things like create disk images, identify personally identifying information, extract kind of contextual information from the file system. This is, hey, look where those people are standing. It's right out there. So this is out in front of Wilson Library here. These are the members of the consortium. It's 26 member institutions from 4 different countries. And the model is that the software and the documentation are freely available, but you get these added benefits of a dedicated help desk, some educational programming, things like that that are more direct kind of service for your membership. But I would say more than anything else, it's setting the direction of the software. It's the institutions that are part of this consortium are helping set the priorities for what the software is going to be in the future. So what is ArchiveSpace? It's like, description and processing kind of stuff. Right, so people are potentially familiar with Archon, with Archivist Toolkit, and ArchiveSpace is a successor to those 2. It supports accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access. As I've said already, these are different zones of activity, but they all overlap in certain ways, right? There are aspects that touch on preservation that are in ArchiveSpace. There are aspects that touch on preservation that are in the BitCurator environment. There are things that are related to description that are in the BitCurator environment, but it's not a description system. And so that's one of these issues, is kind of where are those points of intersection, where do you do what in these different systems? ArchiveSpace being community supported rather than just open source. The application is free to download and use, but unlike its predecessors, there's this institution-based membership model to achieve sustainability. So you'll see this kind of theme also, that each of them has these sustainability mechanisms that are slight variations on these different themes, right? Amatica, for example, being a company that has a particular model that I'll talk about in just a minute. If you're not familiar with Artefactual, they have Atom, which is more kind of, archival description system, and then Archivematica, which is much more of a dedicated digital preservation environment. You have different little microservices that can do different things. You invoke them and you build your set of preservation activities around what you want those kind of low-level open source tools to do. Their development philosophy, standards-based, based on archival principles, as the previous two tools I was just talking about. And they have this kind of bounty model and service model, where the idea is that you either do it all on your own, because the software is free, you do it with support by the company where they provide you that kind of support, or if you have something specific you want added back into the code base of the software that's not there already, you can essentially pay them to do that development to then make that enhancement to the software. These are some materials, again, complements of Artefactual. These are not things that I came up with. I just wanted to briefly touch on, because in talking about their design philosophy and kind of maintenance philosophy, microservices, handshakes, and partnerships, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the microservices and handshakes part. The microservices is this idea that you have these little, relatively discrete things that need to be carried out, and you have the software that can do them, and they get invoked. There are overlaps with things that are in the BitCurator environment, for example, and also in ArchiveSpace. And then also handshakes. So the idea that rather than saying the one system is going to take over everything, it's going to have handoffs to the others. And I would say this is very much a reflection of the first two systems that I talked about as well, right? None of us are trying to do everything to all people. So the timeline of the project is basically, we're in this range now. We're developing aspirational workflows next, doing testing of the aspirational workflows, publication of them, community feedback on the development roadmap, final release of the partner and non-partner workflows. And so what I'm going to do is just very briefly show you kind of some of the products that have been coming out of the work. The methods are to do surveys, interviews, and representation of what people's workflows are, right? Talking to them, saying, is this what you're doing? And so these are the sorts of things that, that the team have been coming up with. Different representations that basically show how people's workflows work, right? You do this, you do that, what software is used, what's the handoff from this one part to the other. Right, Andrew? They look kind of like that?
They do.
Yeah. There you go, workflow representation. I'm waving my hands at this a lot because clearly each of these, there's a lot of depth to them that people can look at in more detail as the work proceeds. And then the idea of also having documentation for people about how to get started using these different systems, because the contract essentially that we have with the partner institutions is you're going to make an effort to implement 2 or 3 of these systems, ArchiveSpace, Archivematica, and the BigCurator environment, and we're going to try to help you document your workflows, provide technical support for advancing that workflow. And so part of that is having documentation and support for getting started on these different systems. So this is information about the project. You can see the website, mailing list. I know Jessica is adding people to that all the time. So what I'm going to do just in wrapping up is very briefly talk about what the structure is for today. And others on the team should feel free to weigh in. Panel 1, organizational policies and growth. And what you'll see is we basically have the partner institutions represented on these different panels as we've broken them down. These will be the discussion questions, and you'll obviously hear more about these as we progress. Panel 2, models, standards, and best practices. The discussion questions, right? Challenges using the models, standards, best practices in your organization, where they fall short, these sorts of things. We'll have a break. That's the best answer. Okay. Panel 3, junction points. discussion questions here. Again, you'll be hearing about these as we progress through this structure. And then discussion and closing remarks being facilitated by Sam Meister, right? So we're hoping that this will be a very interactive process. The final contextual bit of information I'll provide before I ask people from the project team to just introduce themselves is this is part of a 2-day event for us. So tomorrow we have the project meeting with the project team and the partners. This is the kind of open event before that in which everybody gets to hear from each other. But you're kind of, if you're not one of the partners, you're also witnessing a lot of first direct interactions between the partners, right? So we've had a lot of pairwise interaction as the project team, but this is the first foray we have into kind of telling each other about the work we're doing. In addition to what we've already been doing, like things when we have calls among the partners, we've had some partners who've kind of given little summaries of what their work is in their institutions, right? So if people who are on the project would like to introduce themselves, why don't we just start over here? Andrew, did you want to introduce yourself?
All right. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Rabkin. I'm a research assistant here at UNC SILS. And I've spoken to a lot of you on the on the phone or on the Skype. And it's really cool to actually see folks in person.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm John. I'm the third year doctoral student and the SILS in UNC Chapel Hill, and also the research assistant at the project team. And I think I heard most of your voice in the weekly, the monthly meeting. So I'm so happy to meet all of you in person.
I'm Sam Meister. I'm one of the PIs on the project. I'm the Preservation Communities Manager at the Educopia Institute. And I know many of you all already, and I'm looking forward to getting to know the rest of you over the next couple days.
Katherine Skinner, also a PI on the project, Executive Director at the Educopia Institute, and just so relieved that this is finally happening. I can't put it into words, and the project team's heard me say it many times, but we were after this one for a while, so it's really nice to finally have everybody here and really get this moving.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, there seems to be this, I think maybe it's just the stories we tell ourselves so we can go to bed at night or something, right? But I feel like there are certain things that you, like, that potentially have the most value, that you really feel will have all this impact. I've had this experience with publications you submit, with grant proposals. There's certain ones where you're like, this is the thing. This is what the profession really needs. This is what I'm really passionate about. And of course, that's the one that like the reviewers reject, or
Because they're not ready for it. And
right. So this took us a while to really kind of get it through and get it supported. But for years and years, as we've been developing this, it's been very clear. You go to workshops, you go to conferences, you hear from people about kind of what their real sort of challenges and goals are. A lot of it is in this space, and it really comes up in our classes at SILS, for example. What I convey to our students a lot is that we're not in the space that I was when I first entered the profession, which was a lot of things just didn't have tools or methods for them, right? We now have lots of tools and methods, and a lot of the actual work in digital curation is figuring out how to sort of combine them and figure out with your colleagues and with consortia and with vendors and everything, kind of like, how is that all going to fit together, right? And that requires some understanding of the technology, but a lot of understanding about what professionally you're really trying to do, right? So I will just, reiterate what Katherine said, which is I'm extremely excited that we're all together doing this, because I think it's going to be, time very well spent by everybody on the project.
Well, and that's also been evidenced by all of the interest from outside of the project team itself, not only represented in this room by some of you who are here to hear what's going on, but also by how many are on the list now?
Yeah, it's over 150 people.
Over 150 people have joined by their own inclinations, have joined a list that will update them on where the project is going. So clearly we've struck a nerve in the community, even if it took a while to strike that nerve with the reviewers.
And I will say, on the other side of that excitement is also the expectation management, in the sense, right, that, if you look at the scope of this project in terms of it's a couple years, all the moving parts, all the partners, what it will contribute, I think, is very much the advancement of the partners toward, making progress on their workflows, all of the discussions that happen among the partners, but also enough dissemination of all this information to other institutions that people will be able to kind of make progress on these things, right? And there will be, you know, very specific kind of development things that come to writing a script to help with this handoff to that and things like that that will be a contribution. But it will not be one integrated system in which, you know, you just go and download it all and then everything works together. And that's part of the case that we made in the proposal, is that that's impossible because every institution has its own needs and constraints and expectations. What would that system be, right? There can't be one because everybody's going to configure things in somewhat different ways. So what I'd like to do is now hand things off to people who have much more interesting things to say than me. There's a panel at 1:20, should we just do the shift and people can come up? Everybody hopefully on panel 1 knows who they are. Joshua, Michael, and Megan.